They thought downsizing would mean freedom until the county sent a letter that would change everything.
And Gabby, you spoke with one family in Adams County that's fighting to keep their home right where it is.
Yeah, it's right, Michael and Michelle. That bill and a legislation that was passed and went into effect last July that was aimed at also making it possible so people can legally live in tiny homes are all ways that the state of Colorado has been working to make affordable housing more accessible. But the couple I spoke with that lives in Adams County tells me that they're getting pushback for putting a tiny home in an area that they've been renting.
Come on.
Step inside.
We knew that things were getting more expensive in Colorado, and we knew that this would be an affordable way to live out here.
Of what's become an oasis tucked against the views of Bar Lake State Park.
The mountains look like they're right there.
For Sam Kleinsauser, his fiance, and their dog, Kona, for the last 3 years.
Our landowner here, he's had people park RVs and tiny houses on his land for the past 30 years without any issue.
Last month, a person complained about his landlord's bushes encroaching against the road. When Adams County officials arrived, they noticed Kleinsauser's tiny home on the property and issued this citation.
Gave us until April 13th to either move out of the tiny house full-time or move it elsewhere and possibly run into the same situation in 30 days after we move.
I found this report that states 73% of Americans would consider living in a tiny home, which is great if this is the lifestyle for you. But do you actually know what to be cautious of before actually purchasing one? Let's be real for a second. The only reason why tiny homes are even becoming relevant, becoming trending, is because home affordability is becoming out of reach for many individuals. So we're seeing cities, states start to find a way to solve this issue that is arising in their local markets. So naturally, it's going to tempt you to want to get one because this may be your only option to actually home ownership. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the traps that many buyers are missing when even pursuing a tiny home. We're talking about financing, land and zoning, insurance, moisture issues that may arise. If it isn't going to be your forever home, then we need to consider the resale value. We're even also going to take a look at why do some even individuals move out of a tiny home. So you can then identify if it really makes sense for you to pursue a tiny home to begin with. The very first thing I want to make you aware of is the legal and the zoning issues that arise around tiny homes. And it's unfortunate, but tiny homes don't really have a say when it comes to legal jargon. In fact, tiny homes are more often left in a gray area where one day you could be living your best life to the next day, literally being told to get out or move out of the area that you're in. Because again, if you're not aware, but most tiny homeowners are renting the area that they're in. So it's not an easy thing to find. Of course, if somebody allowing you to rent out that area, of course, and this is if you're outside of a tiny home park or area of that nature, but finding an actual legal spot and no one is going to kick you out is not an easy thing. It's very limited when it comes to those tiny homes. That's why cities like Portland will allow tiny homes on wheel on private land, but Miami, on the other hand, will demand a permit, which makes things pretty tricky now. So where can a tiny home legally live? Well, that is the issue. There, quite frankly, isn't a place where it's like, hey, you can put your home here, you can place your home there. And that's, of course, going down to zoning. But zoning doesn't really want, or at least incorporate, tiny homes into the entire equation. And if it does get incorporated into it, it's not in a place or an area where a lot of people want to even relocate to. In fact, the National Association of Home Builders reported that 68% of the U.S. municipalities have zoning regulations that either restrict or exclude tiny homes from residential areas. So you can try parking them in your friend's backyard or somewhere where you think you're in a great location that no one's going to see you, but let the county find out or get a whiff of it, or honestly, a neighbor, or honestly, let's be real, but a Karen snitching on you, essentially, then you're going to be SOL. This is by far one of the biggest issues with tiny homes to begin with, which is why I'm saying don't buy a tiny home, especially if you're not ready for dealing with zoning laws that are not necessarily cut out for tiny homes to begin with. But if this is your way of living, this is what you want to do, by all means, do what you have to do. Don't listen to anything I have to say. The only recommendation I'm going to make, honestly, is you better look at those zoning law ordinances just so you know exactly what you're setting yourself up for. The other reason why I don't think you should buy a tiny home is because of financing and insurance issues. So, as we all know, in the state that we're in, the housing market and itself, a lot of things are becoming unaffordable for many individuals, especially younger individuals. So that tiny home aspect, it may seem a little bit more attractive, may actually encourage a lot of individuals to go ahead and go that route just because that's something that they can afford. But when we really look at financing, a 30-year mortgage is not going to necessarily work with a tiny home. In fact, you may end up with something like an RV loan, personal loans, the builder's financing, which those terms may not be favorable to you at all, or worse, depleting your entire cash savings because you want to come out of your pocket entirely to pay for the whole thing. But let's look at things for a second. If the tiny homes are attracting younger individuals who probably didn't have the time to save, which means you're probably going to need the financing, which now puts you in a position where you may not even be able to go ahead and purchase a tiny home because are you well equipped? Are you really ready to go? Which is why I'm saying don't buy a tiny home because they don't have the proper financing to be able to really help you. Then you have insurance issues that can be tricky with tiny homes as well. Why is that the case? Well, think about it. How are you going to consider a tiny home? Is it a RV? Is it a dwelling? Is it a park model? I don't know if that's even a real thing. But what are you going to label a tiny home as? Just so you can ensure that they have, or at least a tiny home has, the proper insurance. So if you have no way of really classifying it, then how are you going to know, or how is the insurer going to even know exactly what to go ahead and provide you with some sort of insurance to enable you to be protected in this case? And we already know what's going on with insurances across the entire United States. They're not really looking out for anybody at this point in time. So are tiny homes really still worth the investment in today's market? It's really going to depend on you and exactly what is it that you have even set up for yourself, or what does your future even look like? Because alone with financing, the legal and the zoning issues, those are major headaches that you don't have much control over. Of course, you may have control of the financing, but the zoning laws and the legal laws, I don't know how much you're going to go ahead and control there. Despite what I've already mentioned, is a tiny home still a top priority to you? Because if so, let me know in the comments below. Why is it that you would choose a tiny home over any other type of home? Hopefully you share some of your thoughts below, because I'm genuinely curious as far as why is it that individuals are going towards the tiny home route over any other home. Because the third thing that I will say reason why you shouldn't really buy a tiny home is because the lifestyle challenges that come with it. Look, if you're young and you're trying to get into home ownership and this is probably your only way in, I understand it's not easy in this world right now. But this one thing I don't think many individuals think about when it comes to the lifestyle challenges is if you're young, you probably have chances, or you want to expand your family in a sense. Maybe it is getting married. Maybe it is have kids. A tiny home isn't going to be your best course of action. And if you have the right amount of space, then maybe you can get away with it. But there was a survey done not too long ago, and I'll go ahead and pull it up here. It states 44% of tiny home owners regret purchasing, and that's purely due to the size. Like, I don't know what happened with those 44% of those individuals that made the choice to go towards a tiny home. And then the other data point that I had here, which may be helpful, may not be helpful, but it states here that 50% of couples divorce within the first year of owning a tiny home. So I don't know where it is in terms of your relationship statuses, but again, this is something to really think about, and why I say lifestyle challenges are going to come with the tiny home. Because I don't know about y'all, but I need my space sometimes, you know what I mean? But the fourth reason why I say do not purchase a tiny home is because of the resale value. Unlike traditional homes, tiny homes tend to appreciate a little bit slower, which can leave you behind the eight ball again, especially if inflation grows much quicker and faster than a tiny home is going to even appreciate. You're at this point in time, you're just putting yourself deeper in a hole, losing more money, getting behind the ball. And of course, if the goal is to purchase a bigger home or to purchase another home, will you be able, or will you have the funds to be able to do so? And that's, of course, if you decide to sell. If this is your forever home and the tiny home that you're deciding to choose is your forever home, then resale is the least of your concern. Because for all I know, you could probably say, you know what, resale is not even a consideration. In fact, you'll probably put it on Airbnb to use it as a vacation spot. And we know nowadays vacation rentals are more likely to, kind of grab a little bit more exposure and attraction, and individuals will pay for that rather than just going to wherever or going to a regular home just to go ahead and rent it out for whatever the case may be. But, not all bad it comes out of tiny homes. I don't want this video to be like a video where it's like I'm bashing tiny homes. I'm just here to make you aware of what can actually come with purchasing a tiny home. But again, if you purchase one with no resale in mind, then you may actually be in a good position because you don't necessarily have to worry about the resale value. In fact, you can, again, put it on Airbnb and maybe make something there. But the last reason why I'm stating here, don't buy a tiny home, and this is really any home, but tiny homes, in my personal opinion, are more receptive towards it, which is moisture and mold, just because water has an easy way of going in there. It's smaller space, so it's, really, is the builder really putting the same quality of work that they would in any other home? I get it that builders are working with less space, but you really have to ensure that they do not cut corners, because a tiny home is easily receptive to letting air in, water finding its way in, and just start destroying the entire place. In fact, the problem can really get out of hand in humid climates. So this is why I wanted to share with you this here, so that you can see what states are most interested in tiny homes and possibly where is the best place to even have a tiny home. Because the number one question that I have, and I hope that you have it as well, is the builder. Who is behind building these tiny homes? What company, what person, organizations, whatever it is at the case, because that person right there is going to determine what your experience is like for the foreseeable future. In fact, not only just yours, but anybody who owns a tiny home is actually going to have their experiences be dictated by the builder. And right now, we know that the big builders are probably not going to touch this space. So they're going to leave it up to the local builders, the small builders, to go ahead and take this on, which, unfortunately, I have to say this, but this can mean more room for error.
Yeah, Anchor Tiny Home CEO said it is too late for reorganization, and his family-run company is now exploring bankruptcy. That leaves a lot of Bay Area homeowners who prepaid for ADU construction in a costly lurch. Construction suddenly stopped in the yards of people like Maria in Walnut Creek and Katie in San Leandro. They were paying hefty amounts, following their payment schedules on time. But then subcontractors walked off the job because they said the main contractor, Anchored Tiny Homes, stopped paying them.
So when is a tiny home worth it? When it makes sense for you and your future goals, right? I hope a lot of individuals are going into purchasing a tiny home with the foresight of what their future may look like or what they want it to look like, and really thinking about their goals then. Because again, if you're really purchasing it with the idea of, I'm going to do this right now and it seems like a great idea now, don't let somebody come into your life and then say, hey, now I want a family, and this person's like, hey, they don't agree with the way that you live, and whatever the case may be, right? So this is why I'm like, hey, just make sure it is in alignment with your future goals. Otherwise, you're going to be backtracking. And you heard me earlier say, the resale value on tiny homes do not appreciate as quickly as they should with like traditional homes per se. So don't get caught up in that aspect of it. But if you're going into a tiny home today to go ahead and save money, to put yourself in a better financial situation, whatever that case may look like, then I don't think it's a terrible idea. Buy it because the lifestyle fits you. Thank you all for watching. My name is Roney Polynice. Consider subscribing, and remember, I got your back.